Welcome to this preview video of Book 6 of John Milton's Paradise Lost, which I call Heavenly Gunpowder, Mountain Fights, and the Martial Messiah. This is one of the most controversial, argued about, criticized, and praised books of Paradise Lost. And we're going to dig into a few reasons why, and I'm sure in your reading you'll come up with some others as well. As usual, I start class reviewing the opening 26 lines. Now, just a reminder of the context. This happens, I'm teaching the Odyssey to my freshmen right now, and this is the case too for Beowulf and in a lot of literature where you're inside a story within a story, sort of like a Russian doll narrative. And it's important to be mindful that what we're going to hear about in Book 6, the majority of the narrative, takes place in the distant prehistoric past. It's a war in heaven between rebellious angels and obedient angels. And the context is really important. God sends his angel Raphael to warn Adam, specifically Adam, that Satan is real, that Satan is dangerous, and that Satan has a history that Adam has to take seriously. And I think there's lots to be written about and lots to be discussed regarding God's reasons for this. Just like in the faith life of any believer in any faith system with a single God, I think there's constant debate in this poem about God's foreknowledge, the fact that he knows Adam and Eve are going to fall, and the fact that Adam and Eve somehow also freely choose it. Lucifer is created free, yet God knows he's going to fall. And the tension, there's various philosophical sort of gymnastics one can do to work their way out of that apparent contradiction, that God can know the future and not cause it. But it seems really important to the character God inside the poem to arm Adam specifically with adequate knowledge to not fall. And that's the context. It's Raphael's narrative education of Adam regarding the dangers of Satan. Okay. This is very involved, and I go back and forth as to whether I should do this, but with the most difficult books, and I just said this to my freshman with the Odyssey today, the first experience of a book like Paradise Lost can determine whether one ever returns to it again. I think it's really important to feel confident reading something like this for the first time, with the understanding that there's still, no matter how much hand-holding a teacher like me does, there's going to be moments where you're mystified. That's totally fine. Being mystified's fine. So have your book out, and I would mark up the margins of your book with some version of what I have here. So again, pause these screens and just bracket your book. And that way when you're reading, you can sort of have the outline of what's basically going on. And so often with epic poems, we're just trying to figure out and keep straight who's talking at any given point. So anyway, this chapter narrates the story of the war in heaven, and not accidentally, it's a 3-day war. So day 1, we begin the first 28 lines with a reminder from Raphael that heaven, like earth, has their own version of day and night. And I think this is an essential strategy in order to make epic warfare relatable to a human reader. That for a long time, warriors fought during the day. They stopped when it became dark. They returned during the day. I think that's the only way the human reader can understand a war in heaven. Secondly, God sends angelic legions into battle. Again, we're marking the book. Just like in Homer, the marching of legions has a music to it that's really interesting. Milton's a musician. He was an organist, and so I think his ears are very sensitive to sounds, not only just the sounds of the rhythms of lines, but the music of heavenly legions moving is really interesting. Satan's obviously fascinating. Everything about him is. Not only how he talks and how he thinks. Satan always is looking askance. He very rarely looks straight on. He's looking to the left or to the right. And also his strides are haughty. So even his walk suggests arrogance and superiority. Fifth, Satan and Abdiel, the good angel, talk about battling God. Abdiel strikes first. We have Michael, the archangel who's known as the great warrior of the good angels, interacts with Satan and ends up injuring him. And this is something I dive into in a little bit. Again, Milton has this incredibly difficult task of making a battle in heaven between immortal characters suspenseful, believable, and interesting. So Michael does injure Satan, and the description of that's fascinating. We have a catalog of other battles because Raphael knows, while he's focusing on like the Satan-centric battles, there's millions of angels on either side fighting. So we get a little reminder of that. Satan has a post-game speech and a new plan that's fascinating, and it involves gunpowder constructed from the earth of heaven. Okay, that's just day one. So take your time, mark up your books. Day two, we have another sunrise, so war can start again. We have the angelic legion appearing again. Satan approaches armed, and he gives this like Braveheart-ish kind of amazing speech. Satan's legions tried the gunpowder strategy. We have a little discussion between Satan and Belial. And then this amazing thing where there's mountains in heaven, because of course there are, and these angels pick up mountains and throw them on top of each other. So again, Milton has the job of how do you make an epic battle new and exciting and authentic and supernatural. God asks his son to get involved because the good angels and bad angels are tying 2 days in a row. And the son theologically perfectly accurately obeys, but in terms of it being a work of literature, it's kind of flat. And then last but not least, day three, this is kind of amazing. The son comes on God's chariot. It turns out God the Father has a chariot that's very Achilles-like, but even more amazing. The son has a bow, and so pay attention to those Marvel hero descriptions of the Son of God. The son speaks to the obedient angels and sort of admits that while he's not culpable for the conflict, it's his creation that angered Satan, so it's him that should get involved in putting Satan's rebellion down. That's kind of an interesting sort of consistency that the son agrees to. The son who's full of wrath, this isn't the washing the feet Jesus of later in history. This is like a Greek hero infused with God's power. Satan's legion fall for 9 days to hell. I had a great student who was an expert physicist years ago who calculated how far hell was from heaven based on this 9-day fall. I didn't understand any of it. It was more letters than numbers, but it was pretty interesting. And then the chapter concludes reminding us of the frame of this is all Raphael talking to Adam. And just, hey, do you get why I told you this? It's because Satan's dangerous, hint, hint. So anyway, this is a lot. And there's a lot to discuss. I'm going to focus on like a couple of things, but it's pretty intense. Okay. An obviously important passage. There's lots to choose from. And I can't help but to describe the sounds of war in heaven. This is the Archangel Michael, who is very attractive and has sort of a Beyonce on the runway, like wind in the hair, Mariah Carey, whatever that is, kind of vibe. So, okay, good for him. Here we go. This is early in the war. So saying, so you can annotate your books if you'd like. I'm on 189. So saying, a noble stroke he, Michael, lifted high, which hung not. So he didn't have his sword up in the air for long. He's a man of action, an angel of action. But so swift with tempest fell on the proud crest of Satan that no sight, nor motion of swift thought, less could his shield such ruin intercept. It was impossible to stop Michael. Watch what it does to Satan. Hitting Satan does this. 10 paces huge, Satan back recoiled. The 10th on bended knee, underline that. His massy spear upstayed, as if on earth winds underground or waters forcing way sidelong had pushed a mountain from his seat, half sunk with all his pines. Pushing Satan to his knees was like pushing a mountain from its foundation. But interestingly, so much of this poem so far is Satan refusing to bend the knee and be obedient. And the only time he does it is when he's forced to physically. That it's not a choice, it's a forced physical move. Amazement seized the rebel thrones. Again, thrones there is a kind of angel. Thrones, dominations, principalities. These are kinds of angels. So it's not like regal seats floating in heaven. These are angels. And the angels are freaking out because Michael just did this to Satan. But greater rage to see thus foiled their mightiest. Ours, the good angels, because Raphael's telling the story, joy-filled and shout, presage of victory and fierce desire of battle. So we all thought, as the good angels, we're going to be all set. Whereat Michael bid sound the archangel trumpet. Through the vast of heaven it sounded, and the faithful armies rung Hosanna to the highest. Nor stood at gaze the adverse legions, nor less hideous joined the horrid shock. Now, storming fury rose, and clamor such as heard in heaven. This is great. This is the sounds of warfare. Clamor such as heard in heaven till now was never. Arms on armor clashing brayed horrible discord, and the maddening wheels of brazen chariots raged. Dire was the noise of conflict. Overhead the dismal hiss of fiery darts in flaming volleys flew, and flying vaulted either host with fire. So under fiery cope together rushed both battles main, with ruinous assault and inextinguishable rage. All heaven resounded. And had earth been then, all earth had to her center shook. What wonder, when millions of fierce encountering angels fought on either side, the least of whom could wield these elements and arm him with the force of all their regions. How much more of power, army against army numberless, to raise dreadful combustion warring and disturb, though not destroy, their happy native seat. Had not the eternal King omnipotent, from his stronghold of heaven, high overruled and limited their might, though numbered such as each divided legion might have seemed a numerous host. So interestingly, the only reason these millions of angels didn't just destroy heaven by fighting is that God, reading the room, limited each of their strength. In strength, each armed hand a legion, led in fight, yet leader seemed each warrior, single, as in chief, expert when to advance or stand or turn the sway of battle, open when to close the ridges of grim war. So each angel is like a perfect warrior. No thought of flight, none of retreat, no unbecoming deed that argued fear. Each on himself relied, as only in his arm the moment lay of victory. Here's an interesting little nugget. Deeds of eternal fame were done, but infinite, for wide was spread that war, and various. Sometimes on firm ground, a standing fight, and then soaring on main wing, tormented all the air. All air seemed then conflicting fire. So sometimes they're fighting on the ground, these angels, sometimes they're fighting in the air, and the fighting is so dense and violent that the air becomes fire. Long time in even scale the battle hung, till Satan, who that day prodigious power had shown and met in arms no equal, ranging through the dire attack of fighting seraphim confused, at length saw where the sword of Michael smote and felled squadrons at once, with huge two-handed sway, brandished aloft. The horrid edge came down wide wasting. Such destruction to withstand, he hasted, and opposed the rocky orb of tenfold adamant, his ample shield of vast circumference. At his approach, the great archangel from his warlike toil stopped, surceased, and glad, as hoping here to end intestine war in heaven, the arch-foe subdued or captive dragged in chains with hostile frown and visage, all inflamed, first thus began. So just a virtuosic passage of the sounds of war. And this could be so easily filmed right in your mind. So amazing. Okay. In terms of the subtle passage, I have two. I'm cheating. But they both have to do with how things are structured. Milton, I think he's inherently curious, but I also think he knows that for us to be taken into this story, he can't just presume we're going to believe, angels can get hurt. And just the nature of a heavenly fight, like he has some explaining to do. So watch this. This is Michael, line 320, Michael versus Satan. But the sword of Michael from the armory of God God as an armory, kind of like Grendel's mom, kind of interesting, was given him tempered, so that neither keen nor solid might resist that edge. It cuts through everything, Michael's sword. It met the sword of Satan with steep force to smite, descending, and in half cut, sheer, nor stayed, but with swift wheel reverse, deep entering, shared all his right side. So he slices Satan down his right side. Then Satan first knew pain, implication being he'll know pain at other times, and writhed him to and fro, convolved. So sore the gritting sword with discontinuous wound passed through him. So the reader right now is wondering, these are eternal creatures. What is the nature of a battle? What's the point of a battle if you can't kill? Watch this. But the ethereal substance closed. So he's injured and the injury closes. Not long divisible, and from the gash a stream of nectarous humor issuing flowed sanguine. So they have like this supernatural angelic blood, such as celestial spirits may bleed. And all Satan's armor stained, erewhile so bright. Forthwith on all sides to his aid was run by angels many and strong, who interposed defense, while others bore Satan on their shields back to his chariot, where it stood retired from off the files of war. There they him laid, gnashing for anguish. This is Satan, injured in battle, and despite and shame to find himself not matchless, and his pride humbled by such rebuke, so far beneath his confidence to equal God in power. I have to say, the brilliance of Milton here is aware that to really injure Satan has nothing to do with slicing him open, because the wounds heal right away. You injure Satan by injuring his pride. It reminds me of Othello. Why does Iago not die at the end? Iago commits to silence at the end. And for someone who's destroyed with language, silence is a kind of death. Here, the way to really get Satan is to hurt his pride, to show him that he's not as strong as Michael. Yet he soon healed. For spirits that live throughout vital in every part, not as frail man in entrails, heart and head, liver or reins, cannot but by annihilating die. I circled that. Milton just said angels can die. They can be annihilated. Made into nothing is what that means. That's never explained. The implication here is that angels can't do this to angels, so one deduces that only God can do this. God can end an angelic existence in Paradise Lost. So that leads one to believe and ask questions about why does God not choose to do this with Satan and his fallen angels. Nor in their liquid texture mortal wound receive, no more than can the fluid air. All heart they live, all head, all eye, all ear, all intellect, all sense, and as they please, they limn themselves, and color, shape, or size assume, as likes them best, condense, or rare. It's just a fascinating thing, like the way an angel is built. Milton covers himself, like theologically, like, okay, I'm telling an epic story, so there needs to be fighting and injuring, but they're angels, so it can't be like in the Iliad. They heal up right away, but what can affect them is the internal business, the notion of pride. Now, the other thing about the structure of things, we have the structure of angels in the previous passage. Here we have the structure of the earth of heaven. Heaven has soil, and under the soil, turns out, Satan knows that the raw material for gunpowder is there. So this clearly is Milton doing a little current day military research. Not that he had to do a lot of research, probably. But, the notion of fighting with gunpowder and cannon is reasonably new. And it turns out that in the Miltonic landscape, the first instance of that is in the battle in heaven. Whereto with look composed Satan replied, line 470, not uninvented that which thou aright belief so main to our success I bring. So here we go. I'm going to bring you gunpowder. Which of us who beholds the bright surface of this ethereous mold whereon we stand, the ground of heaven, this continent of spacious heaven, adorned with plant, fruit, flower, ambrosial, gems, and gold, whose eye so superficially surveys these things. All you got to do is glance around, and you see this amazing surface. Is not to mind from whence they grow deep underground, materials dark and crude, of spiritus and fiery spume, till touched with heaven's ray and tempered, they shoot forth so beauteous, opening to the ambient light. These in their dark nativity. I'm fascinated by that word, by Satan there. The origins of the matter of gunpowder, it's their nativity is just as it's sitting there. Young soil, right? The deep shall yield us, pregnant with infernal flame. Nativity, pregnancy, like all of these terms, clearly resonate with Scripture. Pregnant with infernal flame. And Satan, as are all villains, are just a perversion of what's seen as good. Nativity and pregnancy and all these things. So, which into hollow engines, cannons, long and round, thick rammed, at the other bore with touch of fire, dilated and infuriate, shall send forth from far with thundering noise among our foes such implements of mischief as shall dash to pieces and o'erwhelm whatever stands adverse, that they shall fear we have disarmed the thunderer of his only dreaded bolt. Heavenly gunpowder and the cannon that follows will be so intimidating and scary to the obedient angels that when they hear it, they're going to think that we actually stole God's thunderbolt. Nor long shall be our labor. So it's not even going to take long, Satan says. Before dawn, effect shall end our wish. Meanwhile, he says to his other angels, revive, abandon fear. To strength and counsel join, think nothing hard, much less to be despaired. Then Raphael says, he ended. His words, their drooping cheer, enlightened, and their languished hope revived. The invention all admired, and each how he to be the inventor missed. So easy it seemed, once found, which yet unfound most would have thought impossible. Yet haply of thy race in future days, if malice should abound, some one intent on mischief or inspired with devilish machination might devise like instrument to plague the sons of men for sin on war and mutual slaughter bent. Raphael says to Adam, of thy race in future days, what if someone intent on mischief devises weapons like Satan does here? Again, a really interesting, angelic knowledge being imposed on this guy who really doesn't know much at all. But there's a chance in the future, right, that this might be part of human experience. And what's interesting is I think there's a lot of metaphorical resonance in this idea. Let me just read the end here. Forthwith from council to the work they flew. So you could see the angels digging up the earth of heaven. None arguing stood. Interesting detail. No conflict among the demons. Almost demons. Innumerable hands were ready. In a moment, up they turned wide the celestial soil and saw beneath, so under the ground, the originals of nature and their crude conception. Again, nativity, pregnant, conception. Again, all these words. Sulphurous and nitrous foam they found. They mingled, and with subtle art, concocted and adjusted, they reduced to blackest grain and into store conveyed. Part hidden veins digged up, nor hath this earth entrails unlike, of mineral and stone, whereof to found their engines and their balls of missive ruin. Cannonballs are balls of missive ruin. Part incentive reed provide, pernicious with one touch of fire, like the cannon. So all before dayspring, under conscious night, secret they finished, and in order set, with silent circumspection unespied. So they even break the code of war, the traditional code of war, which means you don't fight at night. They're digging for cannon, they're digging for gunpowder in the ground of heaven all night long. So what's interesting is that the potential for evil exists even in heaven. We know that from Lucifer's fall. But even in the raw, not even like characters in heaven that are conscious, but even the raw material heaven, which is beautiful, can be turned into gunpowder. And I just think, Milton is up to something there. We have anything God creates in this poem is ontologically good. Its essence in and of itself is good. Adam and Eve are good. Lucifer, the angel, is good. Satan is good in their essence. It's just that with choices, they could be perverted. And it's just really interesting that even applies to the ground itself. I found this to be interesting. Go to 373. We're used to catalogs and lists in epic poems. This is a great catalog of ships early on in the Iliad to show us the extent of the battle and the extent of the involvement of all the Greek city-states. And we know that Greek warriors fight for kleos, for glory, Kleos. They fight for glory. So when they die, I think it's dome in Anglo-Saxon, DOM, if I remember correctly. It's the same idea. There's no heaven, you don't, through Christ's resurrection, you don't attain heaven, but you attain immortality through the stories people tell of you because you fought heroically and you were a hero in battle. Here, though, it says, Raphael says, I might relate of thousands of like good angels, and their names eternize here on earth. But those elect angels, contented with their fame in heaven, seek not the praise of men. I know in the Odyssey, we have the Iliad and the first 10 chapters of the Odyssey. The greatest good a Greek man could achieve is kleos. It's eternal life through glory and war. And then it sort of flips in Book 11 of the Odyssey in Hades with Achilles' damning words to Odysseus. And I think this epic poem, in a different way, has particular values, but then it sort of questions them. So the notion of like what eternal life we should aspire to is interesting. So here we would normally hear in an epic poem the noble angels that fought heroically so that we would tell stories about them. But the reality is, because they're noble to Yahweh, to God, the Father, they don't need mortal praise, which is kind of interesting. Okay, so I think there's tons here, and I barely skimmed the surface, but here are 6 things to maybe consider journaling about or bringing to a class. I think one of Milton's greatest challenges here is to create a suspenseful epic battle among characters who can't die. Does he succeed? Is this suspenseful and good, or is this, one scholar calls it just like toy soldiers fighting? David Lowenstein, in his landmark series of commentary in the landmark series, says that there's 3 central purposes to Book 6, and they're to educate Adam and Eve about, quote, the power and seductive nature of evil, the tragic consequences of not standing firm, the meaning of obedience and godly service, in a universe where all God's creatures are free to fall. So do you agree with this? Like, this is the point? And if so, how does Milton do? And if you think there's other things Milton is trying to achieve, what do you think those things are? Kind of a straight ahead one. What character surprises you most in Book 6, and why do you feel that way? That, by the way, is a great default one. If you're never sure what to write about, what surprises you? 4, what do you make of the 3-day war in heaven? So Marjorie Nicholson, who has my favorite commentary on Milton, she writes, he, Milton, intends to suggest that the last end of war is like its beginning, bestial, anarchic, inconclusive. The utmost refinements of human slaughter are but a mask of chaos and can only end in disruption of the orderly civilization of which they are the products. I love her writing and thinking. 5, why do you think Book 6 ends with fallen angels' 9-day descent into hell and Raphael's narration to Adam? And then 6, always, which moment or passage stands out to you and why? I hope this helps. I hope you read along and listen along to Book 6. It's crazy and amazing, and good luck.